The Ashen Forest no longer whispers. Its trees stand like blackened bones beneath a sky that has forgotten its color, and the wind carries not the scent of leaves, but the bitterness of an ancient fire. I walk among the scorched roots, my steps echoing through a land that still remembers pain. Once, this forest was alive with song. Elves spoke to the branches as equals, and the stars listened when we answered. It was a place where magic flowed gently, never demanding more than was freely given. Now, every breath here tastes of ash. The silence presses heavily, broken only by the distant murmur of spirits bound to the soil. They know me. They remember my voice from another age, when I spoke of harmony and balance. I am the last guardian of this forest, though guardian is a fragile word for one who failed. I remain not out of duty alone, but because the forest will not release me. Memory clings to me as fiercely as the ash clings to the earth, and my story begins where hope turned to ruin. There was a time when the Ashen Forest glimmered with quiet splendor. Sunlight filtered through emerald canopies, and homes grown from living wood breathed alongside their inhabitants. The elves did not rule the forest, they belonged to it. Magic was not a weapon then, but a language, spoken with care and restraint. I served as a chronicler in those days, recording seasons of peace, treaties sealed with trust, and songs meant to be remembered long after their singers were gone. Yet even in that age of harmony, pride took root. Younger elves dreamed of shaping the world rather than listening to it. They questioned the old limits, calling them chains instead of wisdom. The elders warned of balance, but their voices grew quiet beneath promises of progress and strength. I wrote every word, believing knowledge itself was harmless. I did not see that the true danger was not ignorance, but certainty. And so, in whispered councils and candlelit halls, the first steps toward ruin were taken. Softly, confidently, and without fear. The forbidden magic was born from fear, though we named it necessity. It was called the magic of ash, an art that promised protection when blades and walls would fail. This power did not draw from the stars or the quiet breath of the forest. It fed instead on life itself, draining strength from roots, soil, and spirit alike. I remember the council chambers filled with arguments and ambition, voices layered over one another like spells already colliding. I stood among those who spoke in favor of the ritual. I used careful words, measured tones, and the language of survival. I said the forest would endure. I said the cost would be small. In truth, I wanted certainty in an uncertain age. As the first sigils were carved, the forest responded. Leaves dulled, animals fled without sound, and the air grew heavy, as if the land itself were holding its breath. We called these signs imperfections, flaws to be corrected later. History will remember them as warnings. I recorded them all, never realizing that with each word written, I was helping to seal our fate. The forest had not yet turned to ash when the elves turned on one another. The great houses, once bound by blood and ancient oaths, fractured beneath the weight of the forbidden spell. Some demanded the ritual be undone, fearing the price already paid to the land. Others believed retreat was weakness, and that power, once touched, must be claimed fully. What began as debate soon rotted into suspicion, and suspicion sharpened into steel. Under moonless skies, blades were drawn, in places meant for counsel, not conflict. Sacred ground drank elven blood for the first time in generations. I watched in silence as brothers struck down brothers, each convinced they were saving our people. Their faces still haunt me, twisted not by hatred, but by certainty. I could have spoken. I could have burned my chronicles and screamed the truth. Instead, I remained a witness. The forest felt every death, its roots trembling beneath our feet. By the time the first bodies fell, the betrayal was complete, and there was no path left untouched by ruin. The ritual was completed at dawn, when the forest should have been waking. Instead, the sky dimmed, as if the sun itself had turned away. The magic of ash was unleashed, and for a single, terrible moment, it worked exactly as promised. Our enemies were consumed by fire that did not burn outward, but inward, reducing strength, will, and flesh to dust. Victory came swiftly, and with it, silence. Then the magic continued. It spread through the roots beneath us, racing through the forest like a living plague. Trees ignited from within, their leaves collapsing into gray powder before they could fall. The ground split, exhaling heat and smoke, and the air filled with screams, some elven, some not meant for mortal ears. I stood at the heart of the ritual circle, unable to flee, watching the world unravel. Death passed over me, not as mercy, but as judgment. When the flames faded, the forest was gone, and ash covered everything I had ever loved. What followed cannot be measured in days or years. Time fractured along with the forest, stretching and folding in ways I no longer understand. I wandered through what remained, my footsteps leaving no trace upon the ash-covered ground. The paths I once knew had dissolved into shadows, yet the forest was not truly dead. It lingered, suspended between ending and endurance. Voices began to follow me. At first they were distant, like echoes caught in hollow trunks. Over time they grew clearer, whispers of elves who had not fully passed on, bound to root and soil. They watched me with grief and accusation alike. Some cursed my name. Others asked why I still breathed when they could not. I had no answer. I became a warden to a grave that refused to close. The Ashen Forest lived in a state of restless mourning, and I walked its silent corridors as both prisoner and keeper, unable to leave, unable to forget. For a long time, I believed my fate was simply to endure. I told myself that walking the ruined forest was punishment enough for my sins. The truth revealed itself slowly through patterns I could no longer ignore. The whispers of the spirits grew sharper whenever I strayed too far, and the ash itself reacted to my presence, shifting as if aware. The forest was bound to me, not by chance, but by design. I discovered the core of the ritual still lived within my soul. The magic had anchored itself to the one who witnessed its birth and survived. As long as I remained, the Ashen Forest could not fully collapse, nor could it heal. I was the balance point of a broken spell, the living seal of our greatest mistake. Understanding this did not bring relief. It brought clarity, and with it, a choice I had been avoiding for centuries. To exist was to imprison the forest. To act would mean my end. Once the truth was known, the voices no longer whispered. They confronted me. The spirits of the fallen emerged from the ash, forming fleeting shapes of memory and sorrow. They spoke not as one, but as many, each carrying their own version of the past. Some demanded release, begging for the forest to be allowed its final rest. Others cried for rebirth, believing the land could still be saved if the magic were reshaped rather than destroyed. They argued through me, around me, within me. Every word cut deeper than any blade. These were the voices of friends, teachers, rivals, and kin. I saw their last moments reflected in their eyes, and I understood that no choice could ever satisfy them all. The forest trembled with their unrest, roots shifting beneath layers of ash. I stood at the center of their demands, realizing that silence was no longer an option. To refuse to choose was to condemn them to an eternity of unrest, and myself along with them. I began the final ritual at the place where everything had ended. The circle of stone still stood, cracked and scorched, remembering the shape of the spell it once contained. This time, there were no councils, no witnesses, and no promises of victory. I carved the sigils slowly, each one drawn from acceptance rather than ambition. The magic answered differently now, quiet, restrained, almost solemn. I felt the forest watching as I spoke the words of release. Ash lifted from the ground, swirling not in fury, but in remembrance. The spirits gathered, their voices blending into a single, steady presence. Power surged through me, not to preserve my life, but to spend it. Pain followed, sharp and cleansing, as the spell unraveled, the bond tying my soul to the land. For the first time since the Day of Ash, the forest was allowed to decide its own fate. I welcomed the darkness, knowing it was the final gift I could give. When awareness returned, the forest was silent in a way it had never been before. Not the heavy silence of grief, but something lighter, uncertain. The ash no longer clung to the air. It rested upon the ground, like old snow, undisturbed. I felt myself fading, my thoughts thinning like mist at dawn. Yet my sight remained clear enough to witness the outcome. Where the ritual circle had been, the earth had changed. Cracks softened, blackened soil breaking apart to reveal a single thread of green. A fragile sprout pushed upward, trembling but alive. The spirits were gone, their unrest finally laid to rest. There was no voice to tell me whether this was rebirth or merely an echo of hope. Perhaps it was both. As my existence unraveled, I felt no fear, only release. If my voice still reaches you, then these chronicles have ended. What grows from this silence will write the next story.